Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. The provincial election officially kicks off this weekend, already off to a testy start. Well, we're asking you, what are the issues for you? And how are you feeling about this somewhat unusual election? What with the fallout from BC United dropping out so late in the game? We're taking your calls. We are also live on TikTok at CBC Vancouver. Hello to you watching us, and do send us your comment there. In half an hour, working in restaurants, not all fun and games. What do you think people ought to know about the job? That's in half an hour. I'm Michelle Elliott. Welcome to BC Today. We start with the BC election. Our numbers to call are 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. If you'd like to email, we're at bctoday@cbc.ca, and you can connect with us on TikTok as well. So it's at CBC Vancouver. We have the phone numbers up there as well. You can continue to watch us live, and you can comment on that post as well. And here's what some people have already told CBC about this election.
Healthcare, schooling, and where our funding is going, all our taxpayers' dollars, because it seems like it's not going anywhere.
I agree with higher taxes for those people that are using real estate for profit. I support nonprofit housing, co-ops.
I guess money. Since like everything is going up in price, so it's like harder for like younger people like us to find places and stuff like that.
Half a joke. I'm entering a medical program to get a job and also to find a family doctor, because that's what it takes these days. You have to actually be in the healthcare industry to find a family doctor. I find that to be kind of ridiculous.
Long wait times for, a lot of people I have to take. They need to go get blood work and make sure that their medication levels are good. I think they need to have more staffing so that the wait time can be lowered.
The thing, and the other one is like the safety on the streets. Like too many homeless people, I think. And before it used to be only in one area, but now it's everywhere.
When politicians use fear to motivate you, they're not trying to make you safer. However, caution is a good thing, and I think making the province safer is okay if done in the proper way. And I think options like involuntary rehab, they don't necessarily feel good, but they can be necessary sometimes. And I think at the end of the day, if you approach Canadians like you're trying to have caution and not fear, you usually do a pretty good job.
All right, well, what are the issues for you in this election? And how are you feeling about what you're hearing from the parties, the candidates? There are independent candidates in this as well. What do you feel about what you're hearing so far? Our numbers again, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. Send us a comment by email, bctoday@cbc.ca, or on TikTok. CBC's provincial affairs reporter Katie DeRosa joins me now here in studio. Hi, Katie.
Hi, Michelle. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so it starts tomorrow, right? Because a lot has been happening already.
You are forgiven for having thought that it's already started, because the attacks are rife already. So I think they're just going to get more heated.
All right. And so we heard this week's been busy, especially because of the UBCM, the Union of BC Municipalities. David Eby spoke yesterday, and John Rustad was there this morning. We do have a clip, but maybe set it up for us. What do we hear?
Well, so John Rustad kicked off the morning with his speech at UBCM. His main promise would be $1 billion a year for 10 years for infrastructure funding. He says the NDP government has not done enough to focus on that. But again, the NDP would point to hospitals that are underway, like they were this week at the new Surrey hospital. So, he also, again, doubled down on his promise to completely eliminate the carbon tax. But, the NDP have gained ground on that issue, because they've also said that if the federal government removes the backstop, they would remove the consumer carbon tax. So not a lot of answers from Rustad on what would replace it, other than sort of a promise to say we would look to industry to give us the energy that we need to, a proper watershed management plan, proper forestry plan. So that was sort of his general outline. But really the heat came came from his post-speech scrum. And that's where he said that the NDP have rigged the election race. So I really think it sets the tone for how this is going to go. He's referring to the per vote subsidy that political parties get from Elections BC. That was put in place right early in the NDP mandate because to replace big money in elections, each party would get a per vote subsidy in the last election. So based on that, he says the NDP is getting an $8 million head start.
Let's take a listen.
You know, it's interesting. The NDP have rigged the election rules. They actually have given themselves a $2 per vote subsidy for every vote they got in the last election every year. And on top of that, they got half of the money they spent in the last election back. They've started with an $8.1 million head start on the Conservative Party of British Columbia.
Okay, what was the reaction from the reporters? What was the reaction when he said that?
Well, I just think, again, it really sets a tone for how things are going to go. I think we didn't have time to research at the time the votes, for example, but I do recall that I think the BC Liberals were in support of reforms to the election financing at the time. So.
Because it was a really big issue, the corporate donations, right?
Yes.
I think we're called the Wild West when it comes to
exactly.
corporate big money, as they called it, in elections. And so he's basically laying down the gauntlet, isn't he?
Yeah, and I think, again, it speaks to the fact that in the 2020 election, the BC Conservatives got 2% of the vote. So based on that, they're going to get about $250,000 from the last 4 years from Elections BC compared to about $6.3 million for the NDP. So it is accurate that they're starting from behind in some respects. And again, their campaign apparatus isn't as sophisticated as the NDP. Premier David Eby right now is launching the NDP bus. He got on the bus with his family. He had baby Gwen, 2-month-old, in a carrier, bringing them on the bus. So the NDP has a bus that media can ride on to be at all the events, whereas the Conservatives are doing it a more grassroots way. And the last time I talked to their campaign director a few weeks ago, he said they're building the plane as they're flying it. So, and really, they are coasting on some of the momentum of their surge in the polls, but whether they have the apparatus to out campaign the NDP will be what we have to look for, especially in those battleground ridings in Metro Vancouver.
That's right. Something to watch for in these next few weeks. CBC's provincial affairs reporter Katie DeRosa is with me as we go through. And now what's going to be a very busy campaign, I'm sure, asking you right now on BC Today, what are the top election issues for you? How are you feeling about what you're hearing from the leaders, from the parties, from candidates? 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. Tim is up first now in Kamloops. Hi, Tim. Welcome.
Hey.
Now, what do you think?
Well, a lot of these issues are kind of ubiquitous across the country provincially, if you think about it. You have conservative premiers who have issues of health care and homelessness, just like you do with NDP or even Liberal or Parti Québécois, Quebec, right? It doesn't matter, or Saskatchewan Party. I think they're all the same issues that everybody's been talking about really for the last 2 years. My question, though, I was wondering if your guest can maybe explain whether or not the candidates for the former BC Liberal Party, could they take people like Kevin Falcon, John Rustad, and the Conservative Party to court over them blowing up the BC United Party without their permission? Thanks. Bye.
Yeah, good question, Tim.
Well, certainly there were rumblings of a legal challenge, but the party has said that what they did is completely in the Constitution. But, for example, Corinne Kirkpatrick, former BC United MLA, who's running independent, she has been at the forefront of raising some of the concerns about this backroom deal. She says it's bad for democracy the way the party was completely imploded without going to the members, going to the MLAs to ask them. When the party changed the name, they had a vote with the membership. So, this whole decision to collapse the BC United campaign was really a backroom deal. And that has, spurred a lot of anger. Also, BC United candidates, even if they're running independent, they're not able to take any of the finances that they raised. Again, they're saying my family, my friends donated money, and then a week later, our campaign suspended. They have to start all over again as independents. So I really, again, think this election will also be interesting because of the number of independents. It looks like about 30 right now. Wow. And what role do they play? Do they still split the vote? If they're BC United incumbents who have done very well in their communities, that's going to be something to watch.
Very interesting. And what we're hearing from some of those independents I've heard from or spoken to is that they're going to be campaigning locally. It's going to be about the local vote based on who they are rather than the party. So yeah, interesting to see what role they may play in this election. Asking you, what are the top issues for you? And Roman is up next in Port Alberni. Hi, Roman.
Hi.
Hello. And what are your big issues that you're concerned about this election?
I'm going to be honest, as an Indigenous person, I've just begun to see actually some very grassroots level work materializing around the whole, the declaration of UNDRIP and the acceptance of it by BC as a province. Now, my big concern is if there's a major shift in political party leadership, what will happen to that momentum, if any, that has slowly been gathered and put towards that process? And how is that going to affect, especially the members who don't live on reserve like myself, who may not have any other way of actually getting their Indigenous rights and all those things pertain to them looked after in any way, in any measurable way. And if I could also put as a footnote to that, as I said to the producer, I really ask the huge favor of our BC voting public: vote wisely, vote smartly. Do not vote based on charisma, because that may blow up in everyone's face, including your own. Because if you're not voting on the issues and voting on who hates whom, the diatribes and tribalism are going to only fracture us, maybe irrevocably. I don't know.
Roman, thank you very much for the call. Implementation of UNDRIP. What have we heard when it comes to Indigenous communities, Indigenous rights in this election?
Well, actually, at the end of Rustad's UBCM speech, he was critical of the government's deal for Indigenous title in the Haida Nation. But interestingly, I was there in the legislature when in the House, he praised that deal. He said it was important. He says he believes in Indigenous self-governance and it was long overdue. But the next day on social media, he filmed the video saying he was critical of it. He doesn't agree with it. So a little bit of unclear messaging there. And then at his speech, he was quite clear, saying that he feels that deal could impact individual property rights. And again, the Indigenous nations have been clear, as have the government, that agreement does not affect individual property rights. And so, I mean, John Rustad has raised this in other issues as well. There was the dock management plan in the Sept area. He's also saying that cooperation with First Nations could put people's access to their waterfront properties at risk. So, we are hearing this quite a bit, and it's something that we have to pay attention to. Adam Olsen, for example, from the Greens, has outright said it's a racist narrative that Indigenous people are trying to get. Well, again, it's their land that they've been denied access to. So what Rustad has said is that he wants economic reconciliation, that Indigenous people would be benefit from better forestry management, better projects on their lands, and that's where the partnership would come. So that's his position there.
A lot of comments coming in on TikTok. Let's see, Miss Lotus Lady on TikTok, thanks for watching us. And Miss Lotus Lady writes, I'm spitting mad that taxpayers have to foot the BC United bill. We need to close these loopholes around parachuting candidates into ridings. Why don't we go through that a little bit, because that's the decision around the payment of staff and things like that that's been left over at BC United.
Yes, so that was a meeting earlier this week. It feels like a different week because yes. So that was at the Legislative Assembly Management Committee, BC United as a caucus. Now that's different from the party because that's connected to the MLAs. So that is basically they want to make sure that they're able to pay out the severance. There's 25 caucus staff who will be out of job jobs because BC United's not running again. And so the party is basically saying that BC United is saying they believe they have enough money, but if they don't, that they want the legislature to be able to step in if there's a little bit left over. And now Ravi Kahlon, who's the NDP House Leader, he came out after the meeting saying he approved it because he believes in supporting workers, but he says it's shameful that we have to do this. And that, again, he noted that backroom deal. And he said when Rustad and Kevin Falcon were making this deal, they weren't thinking about their staff. So that's sort of the narrative the NDP are using to paint these two leaders as callous and political opportunists.
More TikTok comments. Vancouver writes, independent candidates holding the balance of power resembles a democracy. Another comment on independent candidates by email from Linda in Kamloops. Perhaps if a fair number of independent candidates get elected, then the legislature would be required to function in the manner of cooperation, similar to what proportional representation might look like. Linda, thank you very much. And post-reading writes on TikTok, will Site C be an issue? Top issue. Still time to rectify this expensive and damaging error. Of course, yes, we've talked about Site C the other day on the program, as it is set to open in December. Concerns around whether it will be enough to meet the growing demand. And of course, it was over budget and delayed. Let's get another comment now from West Coast Gal. Will be voting NDP. Conservatives hurt those who need help the most. Thank you for all of your comments. You can keep them coming on TikTok at CBC Vancouver. You can call into the show. Let us know what are the top election issues for you in this provincial election. October 19th, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. And Basil is on the line in Port Coquitlam. Hi, Basil. How are you feeling about this campaign?
Hi, Michelle. I'm not very good, actually, because the most important issue and crisis of the day affecting us in every area of our lives, and particularly the future of our children, is the climate crisis. And you hardly hear a word about concerns about the climate. It's all economics, and it's this and this affecting our lives personally. But what we don't do anything about the climate, then our children and grandchildren, the whole world is being affected. Fires, floods, air pollution, overheating in the world. And so the only party I can see that's kind of doing something or concerned about it is the Green Party.
Okay. Basil, thank you very much for raising that. Climate change is an issue. You mentioned the carbon tax and the positions on the carbon tax really been a flashpoint in this election campaign and across the country as well. And as you mentioned, the NDP saying this week, I think it was, that they would remove the consumer carbon tax if the federal requirement was revoked. Are we hearing about plans to replace the carbon tax or plans to address climate change?
Well, that is, if you ask BC Green leader Sonia Furstenau, she says no, flat out no. She says what we're hearing from the two party leaders, EB and Rustad, is 3-word slogans. She's talking about axe to tax, which of course was first an NDP slogan and then copied by the federal Conservatives. Exactly. So she's saying that they have no plans to address the climate. And again, what Furstenau said is that it does cost money to not take action on climate change in the long run, because again, as Basil mentioned, we will pay for the damage of fires and floods and natural disasters. So again, if you ask Furstenau, she says that these slogans are not addressing a longer term plan to implement clean technology, clean resources. On the flip side, John Rustad said the NDP's action on heat pumps, he says, is basically just window dressing. It's not he says it's just, again, almost for show, I suppose. And again, the NDP are using Rustad's previous statements on his position saying climate change is a big lie, or people have been lied to on climate change, as a way to portray him as a climate denier, even though, again, Rustad was equivocal today. He believes in climate change. He believes it's real. He just doesn't think it's an emergency. So I think it's accurate to say that there is a debate about whether the parties are doing enough to act on climate change, or we're just having the debate around affordability.
Yeah, if it's overshadowed it as an issue. We actually have someone who wants to comment on affordability right now, and David is on the line in Vancouver. Hi, David.
Hi.
Hi, yes. What did you want to say about the election, and what issues top for you?
Well, the climate crisis is top of the order for me personally. And I see how the affordability issue is really plays into climate crisis and what kind of systems that we put in place, what kind of policies we put in place to mitigate the climate crisis that we're in. I see that as ultimately helping the economy and ultimately getting people working and getting new industries and new ways of running our current industries in a more ecologically minded way. I saw a interview recently with the Conservative leader, and the part that really affected me was he had said that, you know, the bigger polluters, China, India, if they aren't doing anything about it, then why should we? And that really resonated with me as an attitude that I don't see as a good leadership kind of quality. We all are sharing this planet together. We're not just in our little bubble of British Columbia, and surely we don't produce as much pollution or carbon as China or India does, but it's a holistic approach. You think globally and you act locally, and I think that's kind of where Conservatives are really kind of missing the mark in this.
David, thank you very much for the call. And let's wrap up here in the last couple of minutes that we have with you, Katie. What can we look forward to when it comes to this election campaign? What will you be? You're going to be very busy.
I will be. So I think that, again, everyone is looking at Metro Vancouver and Surrey in particular, 10 ridings, 3 new ones in Surrey to see which ones are going to be the battlegrounds. Previous ridings were carved up, whereas some were Liberal strongholds, some were NDP strongholds. Now that's all kind of thrown up in the air because we have the new boundaries. So we really will see the leaders focusing on Surrey. The Greens are looking at 6 ridings that they think they can win. So expect them to be really focusing on the island and parts of the coast and the sea to sky riding, which of course was the closest riding in BC in 2020. So that will be an interesting riding to watch. So we'll have to see. We'll have to check back in a week to see how it's kicked off.
Oh, we will check back. That's for sure. Lots more coverage, I'm sure, of the UBCM and hearing from the leaders there. Thank you so much for taking some time with us.
Thank you, Michelle.
Katie DeRosa is CBC's Provincial Affairs reporter. And a lot of emails coming in on this too. Scott writes, I'm concerned about the upcoming BC election and the potential for low voter turnout. With a focus on the U.S. election, many people are unaware of our own candidates like David Eby and John Rustad. There's also confusion around the BC Conservatives, with many mistakenly believing they would be voting for Pierre Poilievre, who isn't affiliated with the provincial party. Lanny writes, we should not elect a leader who doesn't believe in COVID restrictions, is an anti-vaxxer, and who is riding on the coattails of the federal Conservatives, whose leader is name-calling and opportunistic. And Joanne writes, the issue for our vote is jurisdictional interference. The NDP and the federal Liberals have lost our votes, and it goes directly to their interference on land use, where the NDP has forced municipalities to build high density on city lots. If the BC government is going to force municipalities to change this, then they need to take on the costs of water, sewer, and road structures. Vince writes, the cost of living, including groceries and fuel, affordable housing as well, and the drug crisis, and the availability of drugs and safe injection sites. Thank you for all of your emails. Thank you for all of your calls. bctoday@cbc.ca is our email address. We have one more call here from West Kelowna on what are the top election issues for you. And Jordy joins us now. Hi, Jordy.
Oh, hi. Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
I guess one of the issues I'm concerned about is the crazy push to jam in. It seems jam in as many houses into our urban areas as possible, and also the zoning implications too, like where you can have like a heritage sort of residential area, and you can come in and you can plant in, you can have somebody sell a house, and then a developer will put up a fourplex. And here where we are, we've been on stage 3 water restrictions for the past 2 summers. That's even before the summer fire of last year. And just down the road from us, they're putting in a 2,000 unit housing development. They're talking about that. We've got a big housing development going on at Goats Peak. We have development on Elliott Road, on Carrington Road. There's thousands of new people coming into this area here, and we don't have the infrastructure for it. I don't know where the water's coming from, and my understanding is that the impetus or the push for this is coming from the province. And, it's, I guess, is sort of almost rooting itself back to the situation with immigration right now, where, we are, I think it was last year, we were bringing in about 1.4 new sort of immigrants into Canada. Our traditional numbers have been around 250,000. We cannot support this. We don't have the infrastructure to support the number of housing units that the province is seeming to foist on us. This infrastructure, like Highway 97, is not the Mainland weekend. You can go out to the highway right now through West Bank, and you can see that it's like bumper to bumper in a lot of places.
Okay.
You place another several thousand, commuters and stuff like that on it, and it's going to be just insane.
Congestion as well as development, and that echoes a comment we heard earlier from an email that said, the province's demands for municipalities to build more, that's going to have to come with support for infrastructure. Thank you very much for raising that, Jordy, the tension there between the housing crisis and the impact of development and lack of infrastructure. Very interesting to hear. That's Jordy in West Kelowna. Thank you very much for all of your calls. We're going to continue to follow, of course, and cover the provincial election. We'll talk more about this coming up on Monday, and take your calls as well. And of course, throughout the election campaign, lots of coverage here on BC Today and all of CBC, all of our platforms. And coming up in our next half hour, we're going to talk about the restaurant industry, one of the industries that is facing some challenges. And part of it is to do with the workforce, trying to recruit. They are short of restaurant workers. We're going to hear what it's like for restaurant workers. What is life like? And we want to hear from you. What do you think people ought to know about what it's like to work at a dining room or in a kitchen? What have you always wanted to tell your customers? You can give us a call coming up after the CBC News Update. And here now is Rob Zimmerman.
Good afternoon. A major search is underway for a 7-year-old girl missing from her home about 250 kilometers west of Prince George. RCMP say Oakland Schwetter was last seen outside her home in the small community of Southbank near Burns Lake at about 6 o'clock last night. They described the girl as on the autism spectrum and nonverbal. 3 members of Coquitlam RCMP are facing dismissal for their participation in a private group chat filled with graphic racist and sexist comments. The CVC has obtained court documents laying out the details, which includes allegations one Mountie joked about tasering unarmed black people. In another instance, a different officer allegedly called a sexual assault victim dumb and used slurs against them. And Ridge Meadows RCMP say their community has been targeted in an ongoing extortion scam. They say scammers are contacting people claiming to have compromising photos and videos of the would-be victim. The person contacted is then directed to a Bitcoin wallet demanding a $2,000 payment. And now the BC forecast on the north coast. Rain this afternoon with a high of 11. Highs to 13 with a bit of sunshine and a chance of thunderstorms in the Peace. In the central interior, including Prince George, mainly sunny with a high of 15. Highs to 19 with a mix of sun and cloud in the Kootenays. In the southern interior, including Kelowna, mainly sunny with a high of 20. And for Metro Vancouver, Greater Victoria, and the Fraser Valley, lots of sunshine this afternoon with highs around 17. That's your CBC News Update from Vancouver.
Thank you very much, Rob.
You're welcome.
That's Rob Zimmerman in the CBC Vancouver newsroom. Welcome back. Thanks so much for joining us live on CBC Radio 1. We're on CBC Television, live streaming on YouTube. And yes, today we're live on TikTok. So thank you very much if you're watching us there. Thanks for all of your comments on the BC election. And a lot of emails yesterday on our topic, which was the federal government limiting international students by another 10% next year. We spoke with the BC Federation of Students yesterday, who said post-secondary funding must come along with these new caps on international students. Scott writes us, why don't more Canadian universities offer unlimited online degrees for international students? This would provide Canadian credentials without stressing housing. Universities could still earn revenue and select top students for in-person grad programs. David writes, our universities should not be relying upon international students for their core funding. These cuts will mean our underfunded public universities and colleges will need to better make up their funding from somewhere. Will the federal government now provide stronger core financial supports? Instead, they seem to be encouraging more debt to students. Instead, having lived, studied, and worked in different parts of Asia for 15 years, I've personally seen how Asian economies are heavily funded and involved in their colleges and universities. We need to better support a solid public education system. And Brad writes, I now work part-time at a university, but I've experienced the very challenge mentioned of students coming to Canada, very motivated to work long hours on the path to a possible residency and not prepared academically for the rigors of a post-secondary education here. We need a major reset in the way we fund post-secondary institutions. Thanks for your emails. There's a new report today from the industry group Restaurants Canada, and it shows restaurants are entering an era of transformation. There is some incremental growth on the horizon, but with Canadians spending less at restaurants, higher household debt, and just coming out of the pandemic, there are challenges there. And so at the same time, there is a challenge also for people who work in restaurants. And so we're asking you, what do you want people to know about what life is like at working at restaurants? Give us a call, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can also hit pound 690 on your cell phone. If you'd like to email us, bctoday@cbc.ca. And certainly if you're watching on TikTok and you would like to call in, you can do so, or you can comment right on our feed there. Well, this piece has been precipitated by a series on the Early Edition in Metro Vancouver. They have been taking us inside restaurants and kitchens and dining rooms and talking about what it means to work in the restaurant industry. The series is called Recipe for Change Inside Vancouver's Restaurant Culture. It's produced by CBC's Langara Read-Mercer fellow Jamie Ma. And he found one thing servers want people to stop doing is stop asking the question, when are you going to get a real job? Here's how they felt.
It's such an audacious question to even ask anybody. And it's something that's very personal, obviously, to a lot of us in the industry. But then it just goes into like assuming across the board that this isn't something that you have anticipated as going to be your career choice and something that you enjoy doing.
I sometimes feel troubled by the notion that this is a job that is a stepping stone to your real life.
The idea of getting asked that question on top of your own feelings, I can only imagine is quite debilitating if you get that question a lot, especially from family members or close friends. It's not an okay thing to ask. It's not a cool thing to ask.
Whilst that isn't a slanderous statement necessarily, they may or may not realize that can be a little bit damaging. More so the question of like, oh, so what else do you do? Like as if there's an assumption that there's another job. I would politely remind the guest that the comical factor of them expecting someone to come and serve their table whilst coming out to our house, to our restaurant, to eat our food and drink our drinks, whilst asking the person who is currently at work whether that's a real job or not.
It can be and is often demeaning, and I mean, people can be terrible, and it's no longer fun. anymore.
I feel very sad, but one thing the pandemic did, I don't know why it shamed the idea of being a server as a professional. It shamed the idea of being a server.
Some thoughts there from people who work as servers in restaurants. We'd love to hear from you. If you work at a restaurant, let us know, what do you think people ought to know about your job and what it's like and what you deal with? Give us a call, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. You can comment on TikTok or send us an email to bctoday@cbc.ca. And our Read-Mercer fellow now from Langara is joining us, Jamie Ma, who is the producer behind this series. Hello.
Hi, Michelle. How are you doing today?
I am well. What else do you do? No, I'm joking. It's kind of awful to see how people are made to feel.
It's an interesting thing to be a part of the industry, and I was always fascinated by the idea that this was a question that we got. I never saw it in other industries, and it was something that I thought was super interesting that people always had. And I know that there probably was very little malice for anybody asking that question. I mean, maybe sometimes there is, but I think I always found it fascinating to be asked that question when you were actually like giving them, trying to give them something that was, measurable or memorable for them.
Yeah.
And so when I started reporting on this and digging into it and looking into it and feeling like, was I the only person who was feeling this? Asking other people and just the eye rolls or the constant like, oh my God, I've had that question asked to me so many times.
Clearly not. You weren't the only one.
No. I mean, I think anybody who's working in the industry has probably had that question asked to them like a million times. And then also just the pain that it causes them. I know people who are like so many people that I spoke to in reporting on this series were embarrassed to say that they worked in the industry.
Wow.
They were just, it was just this like feeling that like, I shouldn't be here long. I should be here only temporarily and I should be getting out because this is not something that I should be proud of being a part of. And I always found that very fascinating because I think anybody in society really loves this industry. They really are, we all love going out for dinner and we all love going out for drinks. And, I don't think anybody has that notion of that they don't like the restaurant industry. I think it's, we see coming out of the pandemic how much people really cared about it and really tried to back it and support it. But it's weird that the workers themselves in the industry found, and when I was reporting on them and talking to them, they were like, I always tell people I work at said restaurant or bar, but I do something else. And they always have to add that caveat. And I was like, that's kind of weird. I always thought that was kind of, and then when I started digging into it, and speaking with Ian Tossinson from the BCRFA and Restaurants Canada, and how he was contributing to people not wanting to be a part of the industry at all. And then that was leading to like a big exodus. And I just thought, I was like, it's interesting that this stigma, this perception hangs over this industry. And workers are feeling kind of this sense of like, I like what I do, but I shouldn't be proud of it.
Wow. And you put that into context, right? Because there is this labor shortage that we hear so often about from restaurants. Pardon me. And is that a part of it, that it's not seen as a kind of viable long-term career?
Well, I mean, in researching this, one of the things that's evident for a lot of people is that they're coming out of the pandemic. The restaurant industry is right now I'd say it's very volatile. In speaking to a lot of restaurant owners, business has been slower, as you talked about earlier in your segment today about, people's wallets have been tightened, mortgage rates are higher, so people, their discretionary spending is kind of dropped, and so restaurants tend to be one of those things where people are not spending as much time at, and so that affects workers, and that also affects the restaurants. And so if you're a worker in one of these restaurants right now, unpredictability and opportunity are two things that you're probably really worried about right now. And so it's a kind of a catch-22 in the sense that the industry is going through a tough time, and it's kind of coming out of something that was really traumatic for the industry, being shut down for so long. But also, for workers, it makes it really difficult for them to want to maybe come back into it.
Well, Jamie, let me ask you, we're asking our callers, our audience, to call us and let us know, what do you think people ought to know about what it's like to work in the restaurant industry? What are the misconceptions you think that are out there that maybe you'd like to correct, that would maybe make your life easier if you work as a server? So give us a call, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. We have a TikTok comment now, and the comment is, restaurants are also very toxic work environments. So what do you make of that? That their environment itself, you often hear that there are late nights and you have to go out and there's a party atmosphere. What do you make of that?
I mean, in my experience, I've never really been a part of a really toxic environment. I mean, obviously you've heard stuff. I mean, I think any industry has probably some of their faults. I would say that's a pretty broad generalization from a lot of the restaurateurs that I've spoken to. I think they really try to make sure that their teams are valued and they're cared for. I think the industry has really transformed in Vancouver over the last 10, 15 years, and the amount of time that I've been working in it since here. There is a real sense of community for a lot of the small, medium-sized operators, looking to establish, because I think one of the things that really is evident for workers is that you just can't be a part of a restaurant and not feel valued. Restaurants really do. I've been speaking to them, really want to make sure that the employees feel like they're part of a team, part of a culture. But I mean, I wonder if that person who wrote that is wondering if they're thinking that, toxic in the sense of people drink a lot and there's all that.
You're subjected to
maybe an environment of late nights and stuff like this. But even then, I don't, it's not near as much as people maybe think it is.
I know I'm always very conscious, right? I was telling someone yesterday, maybe I overcompensate because I know that it's really hard. You're dealing with so many different needs. When I go out with my family, I often go out with extended family, and there's 19 of us. And so I always make sure to say thank you, because I know that is a lot of people, a lot of kids as well that you're dealing with and having to keep track of. And so I don't know, do you think that customers kind of need to be more aware of the responsibility or with the shoulders that are on the shoulders of the server they're dealing with?
In a way, yes, I agree. I think consumers and diners, I think they do care about the industry. I think they do care about the people working there. I just think that there's an old idea of what this industry was for a lot of people, and I think we're coming out of that right now. I think for a lot of people that work in this industry, they're very passionate about what they do. They love it, and for a lot of people, they really want to be a part of it for a long time. And we are very blessed here in Vancouver with some really amazing, strong and vibrant restaurant industry where we have a lot of great cultures. But I think there's some outdated viewpoints. I mean, I can speak to even family. My older sister for the longest time was saying, you're not going to want to be a bartender forever, are you? And so even though, I was making a good living and I love my job and, the people I was working at, and I love being around people, I think she had an outdated idea of what it was to be a part of this, that this was something that you should only do in your early 20s and that you should, do it for a year or two while you're in college or, whatever. And I think that's changing. And but it's slowly changing. I still think, and obviously because of this series, it's still prevalent, that stigma.
Yeah. We have a question from Ursula on TikTok. Do you find some customers have a huge sense of entitlement, and how do you deal with people like that? That is such a great question. The second question there, I'd like to know.
I mean, yes, it does happen quite often. I think that's baked into the idea of servitude. I think you have to understand that in any profession where you're going to be doing something where you're going to be actually serving someone, there's always going to have that element. Some people maybe push it a little bit further than others. I always try to handle it with grace and understanding that, I think kill people with kindness is the best way to try to do things. But it does happen. I do see it. And also that's also baked into the unfortunate notion. I know it's a big sticking point for a lot of people right now, tipping.
Yes.
I think tipping is an antiquated system that really does trouble the restaurant industry as a whole. Even though I work in a system that I benefit from it because a large percentage of my income comes from tips. But overall, the concept of tipping is really something that we probably should do away if we really want to have a thriving restaurant industry in the sense of taking away that onus on the consumer and giving it back to the operators.
Is that a popular point of view, unpopular opinion, perhaps?
It's popular in some ways. I think for operators, and I think some people in the industry would probably really like it. I mean, for servers, I understand for servers and bartenders, there is also some sort of gratification in knowing that you can work really hard one night and try to, it's like you're running your own little small business, so you can try to, and I think some people really like having their cash in hand at night.
Right, and that's commensurate to how you did that night.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But it does deflate the industry as a whole, because I think at the end of the day, it does limit restaurants' ability to grow and exercise their own charge over their industry.
Right. Let me just, we had a TikTok comment saying, do you feel tipping is getting out of hand? So what goes through your mind when people, the whole, oh my goodness, it's at least 18%, and then you move forward from there. What goes through your mind when you hear that?
I mean, the standard practice, 18, 20%, I think I have no issues with that. I think it's very commensurate with the type of service that you probably should be providing or should be receiving, should I say. I think a lot of people are struggling with the idea of
tipflation,
yeah. or where it's now moving out into other sectors. I think that's what people are struggling with. And I think that issue comes back to the whole notion of tipping. And I think this is where people are like, well, I'm having a tip here, 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 and it's usually just restaurants and your barber and your cab driver. I think the thing that people really need to ask themselves is, why are we tipping in general at all? I don't go to my doctor to tip him. I don't go to my plumber to tip them. I don't go to pretty much any other industry. You are charged for the service because of that's what it's actually costs. And I think at the end of the day, what it really comes down to is that we're not actually charging for what it actually costs. And I think that it comes down to a problem that people need to understand about anchoring and recognizing that, yes, what you're paying, the actual price that you're seeing is probably not what the actual value of what you're actually receiving is.
Right.
And so if we can get over that, we could probably get away from tipping.
Sarah is calling us from Tassis. Do you work in the restaurant industry, Sarah?
I have for many years. I am still somewhat of a server, but I am no longer in waitering. I used to in many places, but now I'm in public service, which I also hear, oh, but what do you really do? And it does feel like, to that tipping conversation that you're just having, is about, there's the idea that you're working for less than you're worth, and then you need to be topped up with these other sort of gratuities or like support from a job well done. And I think that that's really devaluing the work of being served, whether it's as a waiter, or whether, I even once tipped my garbage man when I was a kid, because my mom knew that person moved a lot of heavy stuff for us, and my mom sent me as a child to go and give them a thank you. So even though I recognize that that's not, like, you don't tip your doctor or whatever, it's not a standard practice, tipping is about going above and beyond. And a lot of times people don't understand what the reality of being in service is about, and they devalue it.
Yeah, and it's that issue of respect, that there should be more respect.
Definitely. There's definitely not a lot of respect put towards on service in general, whether it's you got me, my food, you took my order, or you're, providing service for all of, the community.
Yeah. Sarah, really good to hear from you from Tassis. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Mark is up next now in Vancouver. Do you work at a restaurant, Mark?
I do.
Yeah. Tell us about it. What do you want people to know?
Well, a couple of things, 3 things. First of all, the service industry, it's much more difficult than you can imagine.
Ah, yes.
But secondly, I've been doing this for quite some time, and I love it. I mean, there's lots of ups and downs like any other work, but the culture and the camaraderie is hugely fulfilling.
Wow.
So service, I always say service is all theater, but hospitality is an art, and when you do it properly, it's incredible on either side of the equation. But it's constantly, we often hear on these shows people complaining like customers are this and working conditions that. And, I've been doing it for a long time, and I love it. And I know a lot of people who are enthusiastic about it and love it. And frankly, in a fine dining atmosphere, the money's pretty good by the hour, but you're probably not working a full 40 hours a week, right? And you get called off if things are slow. So it's all the ups and downs of that.
Yeah, but you're in it. You're in it for the ride.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
And I just wanted, and I can answer any other questions, but I just want, on this show, let's not go down the tipping thing, because you're going to have a whole hour about tipping. And I agree. I agree with your speaker there. I can't recall his name. It is an antiquated system. It's ridiculous. that we wait until the end of our job to get paid by somebody, whether they have to or not. They don't have to.
Yeah.
It's a ridiculous notion.
And you don't know.
It's the only system we got so far, and many restaurants have tried to do the no tipping thing, but none of them have survived. So,
Mark.
So we're stuck with it.
You're stuck with it. So good to hear from you. Well, we are going to spend an hour on it another time, I am sure. Thank you so much for your call, Mark. Lots of emails coming in. Rita writes, regarding the topic of the industry being toxic, I can say that during my 18 years as a server several days ago, there was verbal abuse, misogyny, belittling, taking advantage of young people in terms of pay and no overtime, just to name a few. I was glad to leave the industry. That said, hopefully the culture has improved greatly since then. Those that have the benefit of union membership are at least somewhat protected. Interesting topic. Sheena writes, tip the breakfast server more. They do the most work refilling coffee, bringing jam in a rushed atmosphere, but make less than dinner service because of the cost of breakfast items. Great point. David writes, I was out for dinner last night and chatted with our server as I know how hard a job it can be. She said it makes a huge difference in how guests treat her and her colleagues. Her comment reminded me of what my daughter said after she'd been a server. Working through school, her experience of serving had been more stressful than her residency as a doctor in training. So please treat restaurant staff with all the respect they deserve. I'm guessing you echo that.
I couldn't agree more. And, I love what I think that gentleman Mark was saying. I love his passion. I think that's amazing. And I think, I couldn't be a bigger advocate for this industry. And, the other commenter who's saying, about the toxic stuff there. I probably glossed over a little bit of that, and I probably acknowledge that, there is definitely some bad actors out there that have not been perfect, but for by and large, I would say the industry is definitely, hopefully, moving in a really good direction. I think people really do care, and it's nice to see people saying all these things about the industry, because I think for a lot of people, this is your first job, and it's such a beautiful industry to be able to give back to your community and give back to, and making sure that people have wonderful times and usually special moments for themselves. And I take a great pride in that.
You're often a part of a very special event. Jamie, obviously a great series. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
More to come on the early edition next week from Jamie Ma, Recipe for Change inside Vancouver's restaurant culture. And M writes that this is a hard position. And M writes, when interacting with guests, you have to be flexible when things change, have humility if a misunderstanding happens, the ability to interact with various ages, approaches, and formality, ability to explain, probably loads more, but these set me up for my next careers as a dental assistant and educator. Amazing. Thank you for that email.